detailed legislation to follow, which we must adhere to. Local Government Commission has an overview of many of these things, and they've put out some reasonably good and comprehensive guidelines. We need to get these processes right and comply in all aspects of the legislation and legal dates. I cannot stress enough, however, the importance that we adequately engage with our communities and get their support for the decisions that may be made. To successfully achieve this, we need to decide on the right delivery model, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in our presentation. So the first review is that we need to consider is the electoral system. Every 3 years, Council is required to consider the electoral system that best suits its community. So under current legislation, Council can choose between first past the post, FPP we commonly know that by, and single transferable voting, STV. Now with FPP, out of the 66 local authorities, 58 FPP, and with STV, 8 of the 66 local authorities use STV. We do need to be mindful, however, that all district health boards are required by legislation to use STV. So for most local authorities throughout New Zealand, there are 2 electoral systems operating, unless a council chooses to use, or territorial authority chooses to use STV, then you've got STV for that and the DHB. However, the regional council may still retain FPP. So for the majority, for most councils, for electors, there are 2 electoral systems in operation. So just on how the various 2 electoral systems work, I'll just hand it over to Judith, who can just run through that.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right. So everybody knows about FPP, where you just tick the candidates to the number of vacancies or up to the number of vacancies. It's widely understood and it's familiar to everybody. It's transparent because a person who votes can see in the results where their vote has gone. It's easy to understand the results, and it can be counted manually if required. So we've done a little example, very, very basic. So in this little example, there are just 3 vacancies, 5 candidates. So electors can tick up to 3 candidates, and when the votes are counted, the 3 candidates with the most votes are elected. So, and that's kind of like how it would look. Under STV, electors have 1 vote, no matter how many vacancies there are. They can rank as many or as few candidates as they want to, and they put numbers. So 1 is their first preference, 2nd is their second preference, etc. It's a type of preferential voting. It encourages diversity in representation. There's a quota that candidates have to reach before they're elected. The results are not as transparent, not so easy for people to understand, and so when a person votes, they can't see in the results, oh, that's where my vote went, and it cannot be counted manually. So your elector gets 1 vote, and we've gone over that, so let's carry on with that. So on our voting documents, it's not circles like is on this little demo. They are squares to differentiate from the circles for the first past the post, but they put the numbers in there for the candidates they prefer. And then the way that they are counted is, first of all, the quota is determined, and that is the total number of valid voting documents divided by the number of vacancies, plus 1, and then there's plus a 0.8 zeros and a 1 on the end, and that's just so that we don't get any ties. And the candidates have to reach that quota to be elected, and then if not enough candidates are elected, then the lowest candidate is excluded, and the votes the people that voted for that lowest candidate, their preferences, second preference or later preferences are used and transferred to other candidates, and that they're called iterations, and those iterations continue until all the vacancies have been filled. So we've got a very, very basic little diagrams to show you how that works. So in this first slide, we're showing the quota as 175.5. It's just a made-up figure. And we're showing that one candidate has received 221 votes. Well, a candidate cannot receive more votes than the quota. So what happens in this instance is that all the votes, all those first preference votes, so that's the first iteration, is all the first preference votes. And in this case, we've got one candidate that's exceeded the quota, but they can't, and so all those votes are reduced in value. And in this case, it's just a made-up figure again. 0.8, all those first preference votes for that Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones are now worth 0.8, not one full vote. And all the rest of the preferences are worth 0.2, and those are distributed to the second preference that those voters that voted for Jones. And so then they're distributed, all fictitious, of course. And then in this case, we still only have one candidate that's been elected. And so in order to get up to the number of vacancies of the candidates that need to be elected, we need to exclude the lowest candidate, in this case Owens. And so all the people that had as their first preference Owens, their second preference is used, and those votes are distributed. Now, it wouldn't actually happen like this, because there would be some people whose second preference on that voting document for Owens would be Jones. I haven't included that. It gets a little bit too complicated, so I've tried to keep this simple. And so that whole process carries on with those votes being redistributed. If we still haven't got enough people elected, the next lowest candidate excluded, and those votes transferred until the vacancies are filled.
So just to stop you there, at that point, because Watson's slightly over Brown, Brown gets excluded at that point.
Yeah, so if we go back, so the first candidate that we excluded, I just coloured green, so you could see kind of where those votes went.
Yeah, so Smith's fine. Smith gets in at that point.
Yep.
So the top is shaved off Smith because he's got more than the quota.
That's right.
And that's redistributed between Watson and Brown. But at that point, Brown's excluded and Watson's automatically elected, isn't he?
Because Brown is the lowest one, so...
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's right. So then we end up with the three. So there is a website that the Department of Internal Affairs have a little bit of information. They have a better little movie that you can watch. It's still as boring, but you can watch that if you want to.
Sorry to interrupt. I think it's probably appropriate to ask questions as we go along.
Sure.
But the value of the votes, so 0.8, 0.2, you had...
It was just made up.
I understand it's made up, but in any election, you have a certain value of votes.
Right.
How do you determine which individual votes? So let's say I vote for a certain person, and Rob votes, and we both vote for the same person. Is there? It sounds like it's a bit of an electoral fiction, somewhat. Is it my vote that is valued at 0.8, or Rob's vote? Both of ours.
All of them are reduced in value.
Yeah. So. But what about the 0.2? So that you've reached the threshold.
Yeah. So everybody that voted for that candidate that exceeded the quota, their votes are reduced in value, and then their second preference is given the 0.2.
0.2, that's right. Okay.
Or, as the case may be, whatever is their next preference.
So you get every one of the 15, whatever, 150 votes, 175 votes, I think it was.
Yes, but
every one of them, and all their second preference is 0.2. So naturally, it'll all be reduced down to little bite-sized chunks to put on the other people.
The other thing to note is that the quota changes. So the quota it changes with every iteration because it's based on the total number of valid votes.
Yep.
And so if somebody has, or a number of people have ranked one or two or three candidates, then their paper is only valid up to those three preferences. And so once those preferences have been used, the paper can't be, it's exhausted, I think is the word they call it. And so then the quota goes down because it's always got to be the total number of valid voting documents at that iteration.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
No, totally. I knew the answers. I just thought it was important to ask the questions so everyone can understand.
You know, if anybody's got any questions, just ask them as we go. Interrupt. Has anyone else got a question at this point?
No, they'll press their little buzzers down.
Okay. So there is a document that has been approved by the DIA that shows the pros and cons of each system, and we've gone through really the FPP is familiar, the STV not so. FPP, a person gets to vote for the number of vacancies. STV, one vote, no matter how many vacancies, but they can rank as many or as few candidates. FPP, the results are clear, and the candidates with the most votes get elected. STV, it's not so transparent, but may create more diversity in those members that are elected.
So could we have clarity of why STV may create greater diversity in those who are elected?
Well, I think that probably depends on the council and the community, and how the council is made up anyway. Because there are some councils, they have that diversity anyway. Some councils don't. Some councils, normally your bigger city councils, your Auckland, your Wellington, they have party votes. So you'll get candidates standing under a party name. STV is designed to break that down, because if you can imagine a group of people may tend to vote by party, and if there is one party that is more popular than the other in the first preferences, if the lowest candidate is then excluded, that's probably the other party. And so that it brings more equality, breaks that party voting. So it's just all depends on the makeup of the community, the makeup of the council, whether more diversity is there or is required.
So it could allow gender and ethnic diversity better.
Yes,
is that the theory, or is that actual?
Well, it generally, really, from our experience, affects mostly councils that may have, as you do, the elected at large, not quite so effective when there's wards. We have had councils that have used both systems. Thames Coromandel District Council, for instance, obviously before STV was introduced, they used FPP. Then they went to STV, they had a poll, and the electors, correct me if I'm wrong, the electors chose STV. It didn't actually make any difference because they already had that diversity in the elected members, and so it actually didn't make a dramatic difference. And then they ultimately had another poll, and it went back the other way. So it just really depends on the makeup of your council, the community that the council is in, and what the makeup of that as well, and how people feel about it.
So we've got a few questions here. Councillor Chandalamakai.
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Oh, no, he's good. Councillor Anderson.
Under STV, would the view in this table be much different to what it is today?
It tends to affect, and this is only from what I've observed, with when people have used FPP and then gone to STV, for instance, it will only affect, let's say for the DHB where they've got to elect 7 candidates, it may affect the 6th and 7th elected members and the last 2 members that were excluded. Those may change. Generally, it doesn't affect the people that are elected earlier in the process. Is that your experience?
Yes. So Headley's safe, but Graham's...
So if you just squeaked in last time...
We like Graham being here.
Councillor Vincent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have 36 candidates on our ballot form here. Does that complicate the situation or does it make it simpler?
And you've got 12. 12.
Yeah.
Probably complicates it for the elector, having to choose which order to put them in.
Do they so they have to go 1 to 12? They don't have to go 1 to 36?
No, they don't have to go 1 to 12. They can just do 1 if they want to.
Well, they can go 1 to 36.
Yes.
For the District Health Board when I was in Wellington, it took a whole afternoon because I knew I wanted someone to be 40, and so I had to get them to 40.
Well, so to follow on from that question then,
No.
alphabetic order on the ballot form, if you've got 36, then you're trying to rank them. It seems to me to be stacked in favour, and I think there's evidence to say it is, of those at the top getting the 1s and 2s, and those at the bottom getting...
Well, we'd have to talk to your
12s
electoral
and
officer
14s.
about that. But from my experience, that doesn't happen because in New Zealand, voting's not compulsory. And so the people that really want to vote are the ones that vote, and they generally don't donkey vote in New Zealand. And so that's my experience. I don't know.
I do recall in one of the DHBs in the big urban, it was Auckland, I think, that of the 7 elected, 6 of them were from A, Bs or Cs, and there was Bob Tizard, who was also in because he had a high profile, obviously, from his previous role.
And that's what happens. Generally, people vote for the high profiles or the people they know.
Yeah.
And because they only need to vote for the number that they want to, then they'll stop voting once they've voted for those. But you always will get people that really want to vote for each one and put a rank beside each
Just
one.
for your information, the Republic of Ireland, according to the information I've got here, did a comprehensive study on this and found that there was an electoral advantage. So,
Mr. Councillor Vincent's feeling a little bit aggrieved, as is Councillor Young yet again.
it didn't happen around here.
It'd be great to see that paper, Rob. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Through the chair, some constituencies have a mixed representation model where some councils are elected at large and some by ward. Is it possible for those councils doing that to run a mixture of 2 voting systems, say STV for the wards and, the other way around, first past the post for wards and STV for the members elected at large, or is that not permitted?
No, you can only make one choice. You either choose FPP or STV for everything within your council.
Okay, thank you.
And that would include the Rural Community Board as well?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you, Alan. That was a great question. Councillor Chandler-Mackay.
Thank you. I'm interested in the for local authorities that have FPP for their council elections and, well, STV for the DHB. Is there any evidence to suggest that a A, there are more informal votes cast when FPP and STV are used for those two elections, and B, in the case of Palmerston North, for instance, where they have STV for both council and DHB, is there any evidence that there are lesser informal votes cast when the two are used side by side?
Yes, there is. Obviously, people get onto a roll if there's the two electoral systems and it starts with FPP, then they may carry on ticking, and there are generally more informals for the DHB in those instances. Likewise for Kaipara, where they use STV but the region uses FPP, there were more informals last year for the region.
Okay.
Right.
And just one more question, if that's okay. The rationale for the DHBs being legislatively required to use STV, there must have been a fair bit of thought that went into creating that rule.
I'll answer it. Diplomatically.
Okay.
My understanding is that STV was introduced before that as an option and wasn't taken up. It was introduced by the Greens Party and it wasn't taken up, and so this was another way of introducing that, and so the Ministry of Health decided to make it mandatory for DHBs, but it's still optional for other local authorities.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. Has any local authority actually tried to run the two systems in a real election side by side, or is that possible? I'm presuming it's not possible, but has anybody actually done a trial of any kind to see whether the outcome is different between the two?
How do you mean? Oh, I see what you mean. No, because there isn't that opportunity to do that. I mean, the only thing that people tend to do is say, oh, if we take the first preferences, but you can't really do that because it's a completely different system. And there's nothing that allows a council to do two systems.
The difficulty I think we face in Whanganui is great difficulty for people in the district health board, the voters for those candidates, to actually know the candidates, because in many cases they, I'm sorry Philippa, with what present company accepted, well, I know how you got elected now, having seen all this thing. But
this is something
the difficulty is that unless candidates get promotion, it's very hard to know how you're going to rank 1 to 36. And that's the problem, whereas in the first past the post, you just virtually pick the ones that you really want. But in the other system, you sort of feel obliged to get to 36, and that's where the difficulty, I think, would arise.
We get a lot of phone inquiries and people a little bit disgruntled because I mean, it's the same with, our elections are complex. We've got a lot of issues, and people do, that's a common theme. We don't know these people, but they say that obviously with the DHB, it is big, but they say that with the whole thing because there's so many issues on that paper for them to think about.
Councillor Chandler-Mackay.
Thank you. A question for Nolene. If we were to change our voting system to STV, what options do we have available in terms of communicating that change to voters in a way that actually allows them to understand it?
We'd have to enter into a really good engagement education program and just keep rolling it out. This would be quite new for electors of the Whanganui district. But I think it's just really down to education and just promoting the electoral system that council chooses and how it works.
And is there money already allocated to do that sort of engagement?
We can accommodate the STV system now. The product that we use is a product of Dale and Jude's company. So there's the STV component in that software, and we're using that now for the DHB. So there's no additional costs to engage with the STV style of voting.
Thanks.
I'm just wondering, Councillor Baker-Hogan and Reid, whether we should hold the questions until the. I'm happy to take them, but would that be right? Just to hold the questions now until the slideshow is complete on this area. So we've looked at the electoral system.
Haven't quite finished.
Yeah.
So historically and currently we use FPP, and as we've explained, all DHBs throughout New Zealand use STV. The criteria to change under legislation, so simply by council resolution, you can resolve to change, or as a result of a public poll. So a poll could be called by council, and a poll held, and that decision of the poll is binding for 2 triennial elections. Or a poll can be demanded by electors in your community. And again, if a poll is held, then the outcome of that is applicable for 2 triennial elections. So looking at the first one, council resolution. So it's a may resolve to change the electoral system or to retain the status quo. As we said earlier, the resolution required by the 12th of September. And that takes effect for, I put up there the 2019 and 2022 elections because that's what the legislation does say, but in essence you get this choice every 3 years, so you must consider it every 3 years. What is mandatory is the public notice. Once a resolution has been made, a public notice must be made by the 19th of September, and in that notice you give your community the right to demand a poll to countermand that resolution. So even if you resolve to retain FPP, you put the public notice in, and then 5% of electors, which is about 1,563 people, could actually say, oh, well, we're going to demand a poll on this, and then you hold a poll and the outcome is then binding. Or if you wish to change to STV, you put in your public notice that the council's resolved to adopt STV, and then again, your community can raise a petition to countermand that decision. Public poll. So council itself, you can resolve to hold a poll. You can make a resolution anytime up until the 21st of February. If you do so, then the poll must be held by the 21st of May, and the outcome, of course, would then be applicable for the 2019 and 2022 elections. So any poll is held, then the outcome is applicable for 2 triennial elections. The public themselves can demand a poll at any time, so there's no time restriction on that one. But if a valid demand is received by the 21st of February, again, as I said earlier, the poll must be held by the 21st of May, and the result binding for the 2019 and 2022 elections. So either of those options, there is a cost implication for council. So if a demand is received by the community or council themselves wish to hold a poll, then there is a cost for that. And that's about $50,000 if you wanted to hold that by the 21st of May next year. Just for your information, Hamilton City Council held a poll in conjunction with their 2013 triennial elections. The outcome of that was 70% retaining first past the post and 30% for STV. So generally the polls sort of support the status quo.
I might just stop there and just ask Hadley and Philippa, they had questions around the electoral system. So Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, how does that work when just selecting a single person, i.e. the mayor?
Under STV?
Yes.
Must achieve the quota or the majority. Yeah.
Okay.
So if it doesn't, let's say the quota is 8,000. Last time I got 7,000 votes. So you'd take out the bottom,
the lowest
person.
Yeah, that's right.
I
and
can't remember
reallocate
who that was. Those votes would be reallocated. If I'm not yet there, it would keep on going like that.
Yep.
Because I can see how that would be quite valuable for picking that one person.
Indeed.
More so than picking
Councillors.
12, yeah. Okay. But you'd have to have the same STV across the whole?
You do. You cannot choose. It must be for all council.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And Philippa, or do you want to hold fire? Yeah, cool.
Okay, the second issue that we're just going to raise for discussion is Maori wards. First of all, the establishment of Maori wards is optional, so we don't have to consider that under legislation. It's just in the legislation for consideration by council if desired. Many councils are now looking at this issue, debating it around the council table, whether it's desirable to have Maori wards or not. The very first thing that I do suggest, and we're consulting with a number of councils throughout New Zealand, really is consult with iwi. That's the very first thing. Iwi themselves are mixed. Many iwi actually do not want Maori wards. They prefer other mechanisms, and I'll talk shortly on that one. So the very first thing that I would suggest is actually just talk with iwi to see whether that's something that they would like to see or not. Having said that, under the Local Government Act, we do have some legal obligations. You'll see up there Section 4 of the Treaty of Waitangi to maintain and improve opportunities for Māori to contribute to local government decision-making processes. Section 14D, a local authority should provide opportunities for Māori to contribute to decision-making. So we have some guidance there in legislation that what we should be doing, and some recent RMA changes where iwi can participate in resource management and decision-making processes under that Act. So there's the legislative sort of framework there for councils to consult, and in that framework, I would suggest the very first thing is when you're talking to them about Maori wards is something that they feel that they would like or not. That just goes on to what I've just said there. So there are other options. There are Maori standing committees, which I'm not too sure. Do you have Maori standing committees? I've given an example here of Kapiti Coast, where they appoint non-elected members, Maori members, to its committees or subcommittees to help meet council's treaty obligations. Another model is iwi partnership models. You may be aware of the recent Rotorua District Council one, where they have a partnership with Te Arawa. This is really a bit more detail here. Te Arawa board members are nominated to key council committees with voting rights, but the committee recommendations are confirmed by council. So they would have voting rights in the committee stages, but those recommendations go to full council, which then would make the final decision. With that model, for Rotorua District, they have 14 elected members, and they're elected directly by the Te Arawa descendants. So they have a separate electoral process. With the Rotorua District Council model, it was contentious. When they first put it in place, they received 1,800 submissions, which they had to work through. So it was contentious. I've been to talk to them to see how successful it is. Their answer was it's a work in progress, but they believe it's a work in process positively. So that's a model. Taranaki Regional, or Gisborne, iwi represents representatives at all committees of council. They have project-specific protocols around culturally significant issues. Iwi can address all council and committee meetings on any topic through their standing orders, and iwi provide input on all resource consent applications, and they have a formal relationship document. So these are just some models that are around the country, just for your information. The last one I've just put up there is Taranaki Regional Council. They have 3 iwi representatives to sit on their 2 key committees, and those 3 are selected by the 8 local iwi. That was an interesting decision, and they came down to 1 from each canoe. That's basically how they determined how the 3 would be appointed. And those 3 are nominated by the iwi for approval by council. And the iwi are consulted on resource and planning processes. So there's some different models that are around that council may wish to consider. And as I said earlier, just ask iwi what they want, and they may actually not want the formal Maori ward or wards with the comments that it's tokenism and things like that. So, or they can achieve better outcomes through other mechanisms. There is the Maori Statutory Board model, Auckland only. That is by specific legislation, so it's not a model that's currently available to councils, but I believe that's being considered as a model elsewhere. Just for information, other local authorities with Maori wards and constituencies, currently there's only two. There's the Waikato Regional Council. They introduced Maori representation or Maori constituencies by a council resolution in 2013. They did their public notice. There was no demand or no successful demand for a poll, and they just introduced Maori constituencies through that mechanism. The second one is the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. That was introduced in 2001 by specific legislation. The third one is an interesting one, which is Wairoa District Council. They had a poll with their 2016 election, in conjunction with the 2016 elections, and they were voted for the introduction of Maori wards. So if established, there is a formula in the Local Electoral Act, which is based on Maori and general electoral populations. Currently, if there are 12 councillors retained, and that of course is to be determined with your representation review, but if there's a status quo of 12 members, then 2 would need to be Maori and 10 would be general councillors. So that sets the framework of what it would look like with 12 under legislation. The criteria to establish whether council wishes to introduce Maori wards is by council resolution. So council can simply resolve, as they did with the Waikato Regional Council, or as, like the electoral system, as a result of a public poll. So council itself can call for a poll and hold a poll on the issue, or a demand can be made by electors in your community for a poll to be held. So council resolution, if council wishes to go down this track, council can make a resolution. It's optional. So that's the first thing. You don't need to consider this. It is optional, but under the principles of the Local Government Act, it would be wise for council to at least consider it. Council can resolve at any time, but for the 2019 election, then it must make a resolution by the 23rd of November if it wishes to proceed and introduce Maori wards. It would take effect for the 2019 and 2022 elections. Public notice is required by the 30th of November if council decides to adopt or establish Maori wards. So if they wish not to, there's no public notice, there's nothing further that needs to be done. In that public notice, if it does wish to introduce Maori wards, there is the right, as for the electoral system, of 5% of electors to countermand that resolution and demand a poll. So there's the public poll. Council can resolve or public can demand a poll at any time. For the result of the poll for the 2019 resolution required or public demand received by the 21st of February, again that's the same date as the electoral systems. Poll must be held by the 21st of May, and the results of a poll are binding for a minimum of 2 triennial elections. And again, there is a cost implication of about $50,000 if you had held a standalone poll. Some councils, like a number of councils, may, for example, resolve to hold a poll in conjunction with the 2019 election. So they might say, rather than having a standalone poll costing us $50,000, let's just tack it on as another issue with your next triennial election. The additional cost is way, way less than that, maybe $5,000 or $10,000 in addition, and some councils do it that way.
But we can't do that for the STV vote?
No.
Excellent.
So some councils that have had Maori representation polls, Waikato District Council in 2015, they held one, standalone one. 20% wanted Maori wards and 80% didn't. Far North District Council also in 2015 held a standalone poll. 32% wanted it, 68% didn't. Hauraki District Council held one with their 2013 training elections. 19% wanted it, 81% didn't. Whakatane District Council held one, 30% for, 70% against. So you can see the trend. If you go to a poll for Maori wards, the trend is that the majority do not want it. So that's just the evidence that's out there. You may be aware of what's called the Andrew Judd Bill. It's called the Local Electoral Equitable Process for Establishing Maori Wards and Maori Constituencies Amendment Bill, to make the process by which local authorities can establish Maori wards and constituencies the same process by which the territorial authorities can establish general wards and constituencies. That has failed. So that was lost at the first reading. So that bill is not to proceed. You also may be aware of a Local Government New Zealand remit for their July conference that failed to obtain support. So there are two avenues there to try and streamline the introduction, if you like, of Maori wards. Both failed. However, Justice and Electoral Select Committee, their inquiry into the 2016 elections, they do an inquiry after each trainee election. They've agreed to include this issue in their considerations of the 2016 and their elections, and therefore make some recommendations to Parliament following their deliberations. So that's all on the Maori wards.
And I just want to confirm, I know there's a long paper, but it's so important, I think, to determine the way we elect people, the way the community elects people around this table. I've just got one question on Maori wards. I had thought it was compulsory to make a decision on those wards this year.
It's optional. The legislation is council may consider.
So it doesn't even have to come to the table necessarily.
That is correct, but under the principles of the Local Government Act, we're trying to abide by those principles, and it seems to be much higher profile around local government this year than in previous years.
If there was engagement with local iwi, who our treaty partners, who clearly indicated that they didn't want to look at this,
the matter stops.
We wouldn't have to look at it at all.
Yep, the matter stops. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Representation.
Just the last part on the home straight
stuff
here. A review must be undertaken at least every 6 years. You can actually undertake a full review every 3 years. Most councils don't, because it's quite an exhaustive and expensive process. Current arrangements, we have 12 councillors and the mayor elected at large, and we have one community board which is subdivided with 7 community board members. One of the first things that a council must do, there is a sort of a process in undertaking a review set out in legislation. It's confirmed by the Local Government Commission guidelines. The first thing that a council must do is look at its communities of interest. So they need to identify what these are. They're not defined. So here's just a couple here: area where one feels a sense of community and belonging, access to goods and services, physical and topographical features. And a point to note is that these can change over time. So what a council generally does in this situation is that they'll have an outline of their outer boundaries, and they'll say, okay, within our district, what are our distinct communities of interest? And we can group those, and then a council can then move in. Once it's established those, it can then move into the second part, which is your effective representation. So we basically then, well, how many councillors do we need to support our communities of interest? Is 12 the right number? We can go from 5 to 29. That's the number of councillors that any council can have. So what's best? Does it suit our particular community? Is it 12? Is it 10? Or is it 8? Or is it 15? Whatever that is. So that's one of the considerations.
And my assumption is that you have to do that in terms of geography, don't you? Now I've got a question from Councillor Baker-Hogan.
Sorry, just for the end of the presentation. I'm just getting in the list.
Okay, not a problem. I'll turf you out and then come back. Same. Okay. Okay.
So we look at the total number. What's the most effective number that would serve your community? Then we look at should the district be divided into wards or not? Should it be elected at large? Should there be a mix? Now, I believe there's only one council, that's Tauranga City Council, that has a mix.
Kapiti has a mix as well.
Kapiti has it, okay.
So they've got wards and two or three at large.
Yeah, so there's two there. Then you look at, if you have wards, what are their names, what are their boundaries? You must look at communities and community boards. You can't just ignore them. The law's quite clear on that one. So you look at those and whether you need to retain them, alter them, disestablish them, the number of them, the names, boundaries, membership, and whether you subdivide them. So there's a whole raft of things in there that we have to look at. The last part of the three things that we must look at is the fair representation. As I mentioned earlier, that's the plus or minus criteria. That's a population equity. Generally, that means every elected member represents about the same number of people. Now, at large, that's immaterial. You don't need to worry about that. But if you do have subdivided community boards, then you must look at this criteria as well. Now, currently, your one community board, as it's currently subdivided, does not comply, so you must address that. So I'll come on to that. There it is there. So we must take the latest population statistics, and with the latest ones we have based on the 2013 census as the estimated resident population is at 30th of June 16. By the time this process is finished, we'll have the estimated populations as of 30th of June 17, so we must adopt those. So we have a formula up there. There it is there. It's got to be within the plus or minus 10% range, and only one out of your subdivisions actually fit. So as it stands now, that must be changed. We must look at that. And
so just looking at that, is that suggesting that we need to put more kaiwi members in order to reduce that average?
Yes. But you've got to look at your communities of interest, and you can't split communities of interest. So it gets a bit complicated. It's not just a matter of moving the boundary. You've got to make sure that they're still within their same communities.
Right.
Yeah. But you can group communities of the same or of like. Yeah. But as it stands, you must address this issue. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Oh yeah, Alan, I'll shift you across if I can. Yes.
Thank you. It's my understanding that at the last representation review, the Representation Commission took cognizance of the fact that these subdivisions would be outside the plus or minus 10% rule, but still established them as such because of the community of interest thing. So your comment, sir, around we must address it. Yeah. Are you saying we must fix it, or we must take cognizance of it and argue for the disparity if we wish to keep it?
You must address it, and in that, looking at it, if you come to the same conclusion, then the matter automatically goes off to the Local Government Commission. The Commission themselves will say, well, how did you arrive at this decision? And they may well support the variance or outside the plus or minus 10%, but you just can't ignore it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So, Robert, did you have a question on this matter?
I am a little concerned that we are talking about the representation review, Mr. Chairman. This item on page 26 is the voting system for the tri-body.
Indeed, Councillor Vincent.
And I would like to ensure that the debate is kept to that.
I agree. I think it was just that while we had expertise from Dale and June, that we may as well get it for the full range of things that we need to address over the next 10 months. But I totally agree that resolutions are only about the voting system, and and it's just obviates the necessity to bring them back for the if our engagement with iwi suggests that they want us to put a resolution around my rewards, equally for next year for the representation review. So I guess this is kind of for information for the future. We thought we'd do it in a job lot.
I'll speed it up a little bit. So the logistics there, as I said earlier, the process is complex, legislative compliance. There is a local government commission overview. So if the matter is for a rep review, for example, is forwarded to the commission, the first thing they look at is documentation and what level of consultation. So we must be mindful that we must do things properly and document everything. Look at the delivery model, whether it's going to be a full council decision. These are detail that can come later, whether the council is have an independent panel or a subcommittee. And again, the last point that I sort of raised was a level of community and iwi consultation is really quite important, and research around that is equally important to back up any decisions that are made. So on to the timetable. Electoral system with 12th of September, council resolution is a must. 19th of September is the public notice. That's a must. 21st of February is a date for a demand for a poll, or council can still resolve to hold a poll, and the 21st of May, a poll must be concluded. For Maori wards, by the 23rd of November, the resolution, if required, as I said earlier, this is optional. And if it goes down with introducing or establishing Maori wards, then a public notice must be made by the 30th of November. And again, those dates of the 21st of February and the 21st of May are applicable. For your representation review, basically between now and February, informal consultation, informal thinking, perhaps some council workshops. We've already conducted for a number of councils their workshops on the thinking process around how they'd like to see the representation review pan out. You can't make a formal resolution until after the 1st of March next year. That's called your initial proposal. And then I've got some dates in there just to highlight how it would pan out throughout 2018. You'd have your initial proposal by May, put your public notice in, which is all statutory requirements. In May, you have a 4-week submission period. Then you hear your submissions, and from those you determine your final proposal around August next year. And then you put a public notice in September. There's another 4-week appeal or objection period. If you get one objection or one appeal, the whole matter automatically goes off to the Local Government Commission, and they would then determine the outcome. So that's really it, and then if it does go off to the Commission, then they'll make a decision by the 10th of April in 2019. So items to consider over the next 12 months. Your electoral system, your Maori wards, start your thought process around your representation, your view, your communities of interest, and what's the right number of councillors and that sort of thing. Whether you have more community boards or no community boards, those types of things. So in my last slide, really just indicate a preference which may or not be relevant, or is really your preferred electoral system, whether there's a desire for change, whether there's consider your community and iwi consultation on Maori wards, and your preferred representation review delivery model. And that's really all from me. So I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, any further questions? Question from Councillor Craig.
I jumped the queue because I'm more important. That's right. Seniority. Thank you, David. More serious issues. Thank you for that presentation. How can we fulfil the requirements of public consultation without undertaking a poll? What's the general accepted method if we were looking at changing from FPP to STV?
Without doing a poll.
Without doing a poll.
You can do surveys, you can do questionnaires, you can do public meetings, all those sorts of things without the full the cost of a formal poll. Some councils do prefer to go down the formal poll process because their answer is, well, let the community determine the outcome. And of course that outcome stays for 6 years.
Yeah, it's just very expensive, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So, and from what I'm understanding here, it is important that we consult with our community over this decision.
Yes.
That's what I'm reading. So yes. we should be doing some form of consultation.
Are we talking about Maori wards or your representation?
No, I'm just talking about
only the electoral system.
Oh, the electoral system. Yeah.
or not?
That's probably less so of what do you think, Nolene? Less.
I think once you place the public notice, that signals that there's a provision to for the community to perhaps put a demand in for a poll or seek more information on it. And once again, I think that's an engagement that can occur, not necessarily through a legislative poll, but just engaging with the community.
Education type things.
Yeah, around education.
So I just want to understand our obligations, because you said in one of your slides that we must be seen to be consulting over decisions with our community.
Yes.
But are you saying that that doesn't actually apply to the decision over STV or FPP?
Well, I think it should apply for all decisions. Do you think?
I think it's an important engagement for the community, given that Whanganui participates very well in the...
I'll just ask you, Nolene, sorry, to have your microphone towards you, maybe directional.
I think given the fact that Whanganui has a very high polling statistics, the community engage really well with the democratic process. So to engage with them over the electoral systems that are available is quite important.
Thank you.
Councillor Vincent, you have a comment or a question? Or? Yep.
Mayor Hamish, so it's possible then to engage with the community and then call a special meeting before September the 12th.
Well, we've got a meeting scheduled for 6th of September, so it is possible to.
We haven't got a council meeting scheduled then.
Yes, we must do first Tuesday of September. Ouch.
Well, I thought it was 3rd of October, the next one when I looked.
Oh no, it's every month. So. Yes, but
6th
we
of
do.
September. Okay.
Sorry.
6th of September.
So we could, and in fact, we have a motion presented to me from Councillor Baker Hogan. I won't read the first one, but the second one says that Council seeks public feedback prior to a final decision being made at the 6th of September 2017 Council meeting, and I'm really happy to entertain that. Now it was I'd written down here before or delayed till September. So Councillor Baker Hogan's first motion is that we can hold that. We can hold that. No problem. Charlie, question or comment or a question's got one of those curly things at the end of the dot. Cool. Well, we'll wait on that. So we do have. Yes, indeed. So first of all, thank you very much. Any further questions? Are you both questions? Both questions. All right. So we'll start with Councillor Bennett with a question.
Thank you. Just thinking well ahead 2 years and considering the complexity of the voting system if you go to STV, my recollection is in the general elections there's a rule in the law which prevents any candidate or set of candidates to actually produce in any form a virtual copy of the voting paper so that they can sort of set up a voting paper for electors to follow. Does that same rule apply in local body elections?
Yes, you cannot have an imitation of a voting document.
Thank you.
Councillor Baker Hogan.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe a couple of each, or one of each, sorry, up to Dale or Nolene. So just checking, Horizons Regional Council, are they under, I would expect they're under the same process. They need to go, so they need to consider this issue as well.
Correct.
Yeah, obvious TV or first past the post, we're just talking that. And so they'll be going through this process in the same timing.
Correct.
Okay, Nolly?
They have made a resolution and they're remaining with first past the post.
A resolution, no poll, no public feedback. Thank you. Just checking, it's been asked, but the cost, the cost of, if we were to change electoral systems, probably a question for Nolene, are we expecting that cost to remain the same as the cost of the election under first past the post, sorry?
Because we already have the software and we're using it for the District Health Board, there'd be very little cost associated with an STV election.
But a 50k cost if there is a poll either demanded by the public or we vote on it.
However, just a further question there, sorry. And that STV is very reliant or fully reliant on IT systems rather than any manual counting.
Yep.
And having been back, so long, 2004, I think the first Whanganui District Health Board election I took, people forget it took 3 months to find out who was elected by the Health Board. That's my what I remember.
It was the Wellington one, nothing to do with us.
So, but I guess surety in our IT system will cost us one thing, but that it will cope with this and that it will give us maybe not as quicker decisions, but certainly, within a day or two.
Absolutely. The systems are well tried and true now. I mean, we do about elections for about half the country now, each elector having a DHB under STV, so the systems do cope. We generally say we will not get an STV result out on election day. It will be the day after. That's because every vote has to be in the system so that we can transfer all the votes. So we will not do a progress result, say at 1 o'clock on election day afternoon. We'll do a preliminary result on Sunday morning. So that is a drawback, if you like. If you call it a drawback, that there will be a slight delay, not 3 or 4 weeks or months, but of 1 day.
Thank you. And last question, I think, is just of the 8 councils who are currently with STV, and of course their health boards in that region, they'll be with STV, but in brief, have those decisions occurred through council looking at, council has to look every 3 years, or has it happened through, in some ways what I think's happened here, through Mr. Barron putting a petition to us and making us really think about it? Has it happened through more a member of the public or kind of putting a petition to council?
Stretching my memory now, but I believe most of them were self-imposed by the council. They weren't imposed by a petition or anything like that. It was they talked amongst the councillors and decided it was a good system, therefore, to introduce it.
Thank you.
Good questions there, Councillor Baker-Hogan. Councillor Craig, last question, then we might look at some motions, I think.
The significance of the impact, I'm reading from Nolene's paper, a reasonable number of invalid votes under STV, and is that considered to be a big drawback in that system? Is that considered to be significant?
It is considered significant. I mean, in Auckland, for example, we would have up to 10% of our votes for our DHBs invalid or informal votes, which is reasonably high. However, having said that, over the years it is tracking downwards as people get more used to the situation. So it is an issue for consideration. Education would play a big part in that. If a council did move to STV, then yes, I think there should be an education program put out to the community, just explaining, the differences, how it works, and why.
Thank you. And very quickly, because we usually have around 32 to 36 candidates standing, is it significant if people if we went to STV, if they just ranked 1 to 12, or does that make a big impact if they should be doing 1 to 36? How's that impact?
Most will not do 1 to 36.
I will. Yeah.
Most won't. Some will. A very small number will, because they want to and they feel that it's duty and that sort of thing. But you'll find most won't. You can vote from 1 to the total number, as many as you like, really. Many electors will, if there's 12 vacancies, rank 1 to 12. Some will rank 1 to 20 or 1 to 5. It's really hard to sort of answer that question.
No, but what's the impact on the STV voting system? If say the vast majority of people only rank 1 to 12, when you've got 32 candidates standing, it must have an impact.
No, we don't.
No, you're not seeing anything that's significant. Thank you.
I will allow Councillor Young one more.
Apologies for the late call.
That's right.
Your Worship. But it was a comment you just made there before. When you were saying that the informal votes in Auckland or somewhere appear to be trending, as a percentage, tend to be trending down. You know, we're just looking at the Whanganui votes, and you know, I think the argument about the STV could well be initially that people didn't understand the process and hence made it too hard. But in Whanganui's situation, you know, in 2013 we had 11% of the invalid votes, but that in 3 years later, which was last year, they increased to 14%. So when, you know, we're going in the opposite direction than what the thing, and I just sense that there is, you know, there is probably the reason for a whole lot of blank votes is that people just don't think this is just too hard for me and I can't be bothered with it and just fire it back to Nolan.
Well, the reasons for a blank vote are varied, of course. They just don't want, they can't be bothered with that issue, for example, as you say. They only really want to vote for the mayor, so they won't vote for anything else. So they won't vote for the council, they won't vote for the DHB. So there are a number of reasons. There's a protest vote, you know, that sort of thing.
It's a no, isn't it?
Cool, thank you. So we have resolutions in the, we have three, is it four? No, three resolutions in the agenda, but we've also been given a resolution by Philippa. Philippa's, shall I read out that? Okay. You've changed it a bit? All right, okay. So you've got those three, so it's either to retain first past the post, make a decision to change to STV, or resolve before the 21st of February to undertake a poll. Councillor Baker-Hogan's, I've read the previous part, which is almost a fourth option, that Council seeks public feedback prior to final decision being made at the 6th of September Council meeting. But in fact, she's got another motion which kind of indicates support for one or t'other, which is the single transferable vote. So it reads that Council indicates its support for change to the single transferable voting electoral system for 2019. And then a follow-on. Now I can split those up to meet anything you need. I'd definitely be taking those separately. So as that's the only motion I have in front of me, I'm happy to take... okay, I'll read it again.
The motion. They need a second.
It should be on the screen as I gave it to raise. So that Council indicates its support for a change to the single transferable voting electoral system for 2019. That's number one, and we'll take the second separately. The Council seeks public feedback prior to a final decision being made at the 6th September 2017 Council meeting. I'll second that. You'll second both of those? No, just the second one. Second. So it's moved, Councillor Baker-Hogan, that's seconded Councillor Craig. Do we have a seconder? Transferable is looking interesting.
You could second for just for discussion.
I will second the first one as well.
Okay, see.
Otherwise, I think the second one.
Well, the second one does live on its own, but I'm happy to receive both of those.
Okay.
All right, so they're moved and seconded. I can't see anything wrong with either of those in terms of grammar or meaning. 6th of September is the next meeting, isn't it? Transferable is a bit ropey. There we go.
Okay, can I speak to that, Mayor?
Yes, so I'll just see, Councillor Jobin, you're wanting to speak to it, or you're wanting to just... So, question of clarification before we have speeches.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I would have is that in that motion we talk about seeks public feedback prior to the 6th of September. So how good a job could we do of what I'm interpreting seeking public feedback in terms of engaging with our community? How good a job could we do of that before the 6th of September? I guess the follow-on question for that would be how valid is it? And could we rely on it?
Can I answer
Given
that?
it's a very limited period.
Councillor Hagan?
I guess my answer to that is that it's been already, I think if we didn't know already, it's been said by Dale that we need to get support, a level of support for our community, for our decisions. When I speak to my motion, I'll speak a bit more, but, I have some disappointment. We've had an opportunity to actually get this issue out since Mr. Barham put a petition to us since late April or early May. I haven't quite picked up the date of that petition, but however, we now have an opportunity. I guess the reason, and I think that could be pretty wide and it shouldn't be very expensive. We'd hope our newspaper would play a role in that, but through our whole IT, communications, social media, etc., I think that we have a really good opportunity without spending any money, with the resources we've got, to get good public feedback. But it's the reason I think it's important we put a line in the sand and make an indicated decision, because we are put here by we are elected to make decisions, and I think it's important we give a steer, because yes, that feedback may not be truly representative, but it gives us a steer.
I think you've bled over into your speech, so I'm not going to allow that. But I think you've answered.
Well, it wasn't actually a question of Philippa, but
I think she answered it well.
It's more a question of management and what resource we can devote to this, so that we do a pretty good job of it. It depends on what kind of job. I'll answer this before Kim can take over, because it's not an annual plan submission. It's not a 10-year plan submission. We're not going to have a submissions process and a hearing on this. We can make a decision right now to turf it out right now. So public engagement can be as long or short as you need it. And I think Councillor Hogan has identified social media and engagement with the Cron, who'd love to publish something above the fold that's relevant and controversial. Are really, really good mechanisms. It's not going to be perfect, because the only way to get it perfect would be to go out for a poll. But Kim.
Yeah, I think you've covered that. I don't think it's going to be deep engagement of going to community halls and everything else to explain, but certainly by social media and our networks will have a big enough reach, I believe, so it can be done. Yep.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Kate. Charlie, a question or a question?
As far as public engagement, is this going to be binding, or are we just going to get a bit of lip service and make our own decisions? What's the real point in doing that?
I think it's certainly not binding. We have to make the decision in the end, and a poll is referendum is the only way to actually bind us. We must be allowed to do it. I guess my question about the motions is the first motion, by indicating a support, are we skewing that public engagement? And that's a question that you'll always have
Just makes me nervous. Your Worship, we've already had this sort of thing. We've had polls and referendums and we totally ignore them.
No, it depends.
Well, in regard to the H, it was totally ignored. So why was
selling gas was ignored too, but it was the right decision to make at the time. Both ones. So right. We actually can't ignore this one. It is binding. It's a binding poll on our voting system if it comes up. Just as the same if a poll is demanded by people wanting the Maori Awards, then that would be a binding poll. So, in lieu of no further questions, the inexhaustible supply of questions from Councillor Jovelin.
It's the second time I've spoken at this meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I was just being cheeky.
So, if this recommendation was successful, and subsequently at the September meeting we voted in favour of STV, just say, would the members of the public still be able to seek a poll?
Yes, on FPP. Yes, you can seek a poll on whatever the alternative is, and again, it's binding. So that's why the options of resolving to undertake a poll on either is one of the motions here. So, question or comment, Rob?
I'd just like to ask that the order that these are put is that the second one is the first.
Is first. I'm happy for that. I don't, they are separate, and I'm happy to go through that.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Baker-Hogan, you want to speak to the...
Yeah, I'll just...
both or either, I don't mind.
Yeah, both motions. Yep. Thank you. I've spoken probably a little bit to it already, but I just want to... firstly, I want to express actually huge disappointment that we've had no pre-communication with our community over this issue when we've had an opportunity since at least Mr Barron brought his petition to us, and when we knew this item was going to be in our public papers. And I did bring it. I emailed Mayor and Council and CEO yesterday about this, and I was hoping, and I haven't actually checked the website, but I saw no press release, that I think could have happened yesterday because this
I'd
council.
like you to speak to the motion, please.
Yep. So but that is a big part of this, and I think that's why the second motion is so important. This is a big issue, but be very clear. Ratepayers will not welcome us spending $50,000 on a poll to make this decision. They put us here to consider the information we get. We've got good information from Mr Barron, we've got good information today, and us make a decision. So obviously we've got a choice of recommendations today. But although I don't think it'll be legislative, we've certainly been, it's been put to us that it's pretty important, and I think we know that, to try and get support for our decisions through the community. So really, this is the best way forward to get to get as good a public feedback as we can, spending little or no money within all our resources we've got and within the community with our newspapers. I guess, I've been on this council since 2000. I've been 5 times elected to council, and this council, way before my time, has had the FPP process in place. Yes, it's worked. Sure, it's worked well for us. I guess I won't go on to the. No, it's worked well for us, but I think we've been given a really good case here why we should consider a change. And I guess what I come down to, if nothing else, it is time to consider a more equitable minority representation and broader proportionality. And this gives us an opportunity to do that. It also gives us the an opportunity to have a reduction in wasted votes. And we see from the District Health Board...
yes, so point of order.
What's the point of order?
What's your...
The point of order is that the members
sorry.
are not addressing the motion. They're arguing for either one or the other.
I'm indicating my support for STV.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mayor.
I'm going to decline that point of order because I think Councillor Baker-Hogan is addressing the motion, the top motion, indicating support for a change to the single transferable voting system. She has to be able to articulate why that should be a council decision.
And I guess my last point at this stage would be that, yes, Whanganui has got high voter participation. We'd always like it to be higher. My personal view is that it's much more to do with the issues and the personalities that we have had sitting on our council for many years. That's a good thing. But I certainly don't see that STV would stop that. I think having a change actually may enhance high participation and certainly sit alongside obviously with the District Health Board. And I'm very disappointed that Horizons Regional Council haven't seemed to have sought any voter feedback, any public feedback in making their decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker-Hogan. Councillor Craig.
Thank you. The First point, a $50,000 poll, I think, is really something I don't want to be spending, this council be spending money on. And I think by engaging with the public, it should give us a feel and a better understanding for the arguments out there and the support either way from the community. And I mean, my hope is that by doing the consultation for a month, we should it'll hopefully avoid an expensive poll. So I'll be definitely voting for that the council seeks feedback. I am actually supporting the move to STV. It's got its merits and it's got some drawbacks, mainly the potential for spoiled votes, which is a concern. It is still a relatively simple voting method, but complex voting system or counting system. But I believe it delivers better community representation, and that's what we should be trying to achieve. Thank you. So I'll be supporting both the new resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Craig. Councillor Chandilar Mackay.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be supporting both motions as well, and I want to endorse and support Councillor Baker-Hogan's comments and also Councillor Craig's. I do believe that we need to be working towards a system that does allow for more equitable representation, and I think that STV provides an opportunity for more votes to be counted rather than wasted, and I think it's something that we should be looking at. In saying that, we haven't up until this point taken the opportunity to seek feedback and dip our toes in the water in terms of talking to the voting public. And looking at this report here that Nolene has provided us, I'm looking at the STV Council statistics for Dunedin City Council. 674 informal votes, 2,011 blank, 45.1% voter participation. Go down to FPP and you've got Rotorua Lakes Council with 180 informal votes and 859 blanks with 45.9% voter participation, so around the same amount. And that is a concern for me as the, I guess, part of a local authority that does have the highest provincial turnout in the country at this point, and I do want to retain that. So I will be supporting these two motions, but I am also very interested in hearing what the public have to say about a transition to STV. Thank you.
Councillor Vinson.
Thank you. Yes, just point out to Councillor Josh that there's 40,000, more than 40,000 votes returned in Dunedin and 21,000 in Rotorua. So comparing the rate, you'd have to compare the number of votes cast as well. Now, I'd like to say that I do strongly support the first part of this motion, which is the lower one on the screen. This is far too important decision for those in this room just to make on their own without seeking public feedback. And we don't need to have a $50,000 referendum, as others have mentioned. I think we've got ample resources to get an opinion, to gauge a feeling from the community about their desire. And let's look at the past record of their desire. It's clear from the polls that have been taken so far that the community doesn't want STV. It was mentioned here, the last poll in Waikato, 70% STV, 30% the other way around, 70% FPP, 30% STV. My suspicion that it's a very similar number in Whanganui. The general and ongoing problem with STV is the system is seen by so many people as so complex they can't understand it. And I mean, even Bill Gates wouldn't be able to work this one out on the counting system. If we go back to the local health board here on page 26, you'll see the informal votes here in Whanganui. 1,377 were informal and 1,297 blank in 2013. It increased in 2016 to 1,229 and 1,657. Now that's in a total votes returned of under 20,000. It's considerable the amount of confusion that is being caused. Now, if we're going to change our system of voting, we need to be pretty well guaranteed of two goals. One is increased participation, and the other is increased diversity. If we talk about increased participation, if you look at page 27, you'll see there from the charts that are there that the STV councils have a substantially less participation than the FPP councils, up to 10%. And ours in Whanganui at the moment is very, very high, and we don't want to put that threat. So the first thing is the promise about increased participation, no evidence. The second thing is increased diversity, no evidence again. And I just look at the websites today of the Palmerston North City Council. They have 9 men and 6 women and no Maoris on their council. The Dunedin Council, 11 men, 4 women and none of Maori descent. The claim for increased diversity cannot be substantiated. So I think that there needs to be a lot more research into this, and to make sure that the public are going to get out of this what they expect they're going to get out of it, and allowing us to get this out into the electorate, have a discussion on it, and talk about it again on the 6th of December is a good move.
So, 6th of September.
6th of September.
And I pointed out, Rob, just to correct you, Tangi Utikari is Maori. He's a Cook Island Maori, but nevertheless, he's Deputy Mayor of Palmerston North. Alan, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's as good as the second motion, I guess the top of the list motion, second on the screen is, and I think it's a very good motion and it's essential it be done. The other motion is equally as bad, and I'm not going to speak for one or the other of the systems because I want to hear the public say what they want. The first motion might be argued, or the top motion it might be argued, is that the council is showing some leadership here. It's not. In the construction of surveys, that is an incredible way to bias a survey, and it's not leadership. It's what I would call subliminal coercion to put that first motion and accept it and send it out there.
Councillor Joplin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm going to say the same thing in a slightly different way, because what the first motion says to me is that council's actually made up its mind, but we'd actually like to have a chat with the community, but we've made up our mind. If we were saying that council is considering the options and would like to seek feedback, then I'd be good with that, but I think it smacks of tokenism, really. So I'm happy to support the second motion, but not the first.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Vincent a little bit on this one. I don't really see that much evidence to really encourage me to want to go to STV, but the only thing that really concerns me is the mayoral vote, and I think the STV is does that a lot better. Now, assuming that Hamish runs again next election, I don't think there'll be any problems. But in another circumstance, as it is, people can split the votes a lot, and I think it's really important to have for the public to choose the mayor as really a leader of the community. That is someone who's backed by the majority, and so I'm inclined to support STV for that reason alone. Thank you.
So any further speakers before me? And yeah, you've got a right to reply. Look, I'll just say briefly that I entirely agree with Councillors Taylor and Joplin. As I intimated before, I fear that if Council indicates its support for change, then that skews what should be some very open public feedback. I commend Councillor Baker-Hogan for that second part of the motion. I think it's she's dead right about public feedback being a way through that may obviate the need for a poll. I'm seeing Steve Barron sharpening up his fountain pen to get 1,563 signatures, but nevertheless, it's an important thing to get out to the public over the next month. And I commit to holding a public meeting to enable discussion and questions as we've had today, as long as Nolene can make herself available as well to back me up in case I get things wrong. But I won't be voting for the top motion, but I certainly will be voting for the second. Councillor Baker-Hogan, you're right of reply.
Thank you for this discussion. I just want to firstly briefly thank Mr Barron for bringing his petition, because quite frankly I don't think this council would have engaged in any of this discussion or and considered public feedback on this issue at all, and in fact it hasn't for a number of years. So I'm very clear about that. I'd also like, and that doesn't mean you know, I'm also very interested to hear public feedback. I won't be at all embarrassed to possibly end up changing my position if you call it a position, in September. The word indicates its support, I think, is just a small line in the sand. And one of the biggest criticisms I hear out with all my experience of being on council for many years is, you know, are we going to a 10-year plan, Philippa, to make a decision on fixing the pothole down my street? It is about leadership. This is completely about leadership. You know, this is our job. We get paid to consider all this information and to give a steer, and that's all we're doing, is giving a small steer to this community to get them even thinking about it. We have had 2 months to go out there and get public feedback. We could have put a press release out with our public papers. We should have done it. We've got nothing here. We are not showing any leadership at all, and so I would
I'm just
really
going to show you leadership, and please limit your comments to the debate.
They're quite appropriate, I believe.
No, they're not, so keep going.
They are. No, you're just taking offence because there was no leadership taken
I'm not
by
sorry,
this council.
Councillor Baker-Hogan, thank you. I think you're right to reply
that is-
straight off the relevant topic. Either keep it relevant or I'll turn your microphone off. Come on.
This is how PC council's got. Now,
No, it's
bottom
not
line,
PC, it's open
I would
and
really
transparent.
like people to, you know, at the end of the day, the second motion is going to get supported. That's important. But, you know, it is our job to show some leadership, to consider the whole issue more, and to just say, hey, we're leaning towards changing our system. What do you think about that? Rather than say, what do you think, people? We're put here, we're paid, but hey, you let us know and we'll get a random group of the most interested people. So, you know, that's fine, but and I won't get any more support because some people get offended by that, but that is the reality. Let's show some real leadership and send us an indication to our community. But whatever will be. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to put the first motion, the bottom motion that council seeks public feedback prior to a final decision being made at the next council meeting. I'll put that first. So all those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. And the top motion that council indicates its support for change to the single transferable voting electoral system for 2019. All those in favour? Against? And that's okay. So the names who voted for, it was Councillor Craig and Councillor Chandler-Mackay and Councillor Baker-Hogan. And those against is everybody else. Anyone abstaining? No, that's lost. Thank you very much. A very, very important debate, and I, as I say, commit to, and I do want to thank both Dale and June, but also Steve Barron for raising this. I do disagree with Councillor Baker-Hogan. It wasn't because of that. It's because we're legislated to consider that, but consider the voting system. We must do it, but Steve Barron has certainly focused a lot of intention on this, and I'm sure the next month he will assist. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nolene. And swiftly on, just before we have a break, I'd like to get through a couple of motions. Sorry, a couple of items. Item number 3, proposed change to the governance and administration of the Manawatu Whanganui Disaster Relief Trust. Anyone else want to do it, or do I have to? I'll it's moved by Councillor Craig, seconded by Councillor Joblin. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Yes, he's about to get a cup of tea after we've just done government consultation update. So, Justin. Elucidate us.
Good afternoon to the Chair. The government consultation update, the information is just for noting, so it's just updating the Council on open submissions. There are 3 and there are 2, or there is 1 change to a close or a closing date. Happy to take any questions or if there are any. I would just also draw the attention to the members that there's a discussion document circulating around the long-term changes to the Remuneration Authority, and that any feedback can be forwarded through, and we'll be drafting the submission on that.
Councillor Craig has a question.
Yeah, thank you. What I don't understand is we don't need to be looking at Māori wards till later, but item 2 is a review of the law relating to local government elections, including a law change to make the establishment of Māori wards, etc., and the closing date for our submissions is the 22nd of August.
Yeah.
So how can we...
Yeah, Councillor Craig, I think Dale just addressed that, saying that this is a parallel process that Parliament are pursuing through the electoral and local government select committee.
Submission are we going to make on this particular item if it's due on the 22nd of August and we haven't had time to consider it?
Through the Chair, the submission the submission open is by the inquiry into the local government elections, and that has been open since the beginning or the end of beginning of this year. So what they've done is they've pulled in the question around the Maori electorates into the wider look at the local government election law. So if the councillors were of a mind to make a submission on that, it is open. Staff are not recommending that it's something that council submit on. However, it's up to the council to decide whether or not it makes a submission on those matters or anything else in relation to the local government electoral legislation.
So my question is, well, what discussion are we going to have, and when are we going to make a decision on what we are or aren't going to put in on this particular item? And have we been consulted specifically on Māori wards?
So we're going to have a discussion right now. That's the point of the item, but we've just had Dale and June Ofskovsky, thank you, come here, but it's not part of the mandated consideration. So I guess my question, having heard from, actually I'm reminded, by the way, where we encountered Dale, and I think this is quite apposite considering recent discussions from a certain councillor, is we attended a electoral workshop run by Solgum. It'd be just over a month ago. It was just before the July, might have been 30th of June or so, and that's where and it was about structuring exactly this, both the Māori wards and also the vote on STV versus FPP, or the resolution around that. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. I think we'd be my personal position is I agree with the officers that it's probably not something that we want to submit on, and certainly not without engagement with local iwi.
So there has been no engagement with local iwi?
I've certainly had discussions around it.
But nothing official by them?
No, things take time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'd be saying we don't make a submission because we haven't had time to fully. It's quite a complex issue. Thank you.
Yeah. So, last resolution before we have a cup of tea. Thank you very much. Councillor Joblin moved it. Can I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Let's have a cup of tea at 5 to 3. We'll come back at 5 past. service. Is this anyone's phone? So there is a mobile phone that was found in Charlie's pocket, quite literally. If it's anyone's, all right. Have you lost your phone? Okay, I'll reconvene the meeting. There is a phone here. Josh, have you lost your phone? It's got nothing.
They put it in Charlie's pocket.
All right. So next item is the local government conference paper. On page 46. We might close that door. I feel a liverish wind. Any questions? Councillor Baker-Hogan.
Where do I start? Well, I posed this to council too. I provided all the information that sits on local government website. I guess I have asked for previous papers, previous decisions of council on decisions to be made about how many people might go to local government New Zealand conference, the process around remits. I'm clear it's all there. I haven't got I've asked that to be provided. I've been provided with nothing.
Council, we asked for that last night.
I sent it yesterday afternoon, and I do. So my question is, why is this council indicating by email a couple of months ago that, I haven't got the email in front of me, but you briefly showed it to me earlier, Mayor McDowell, as why the mayor and 2 councillors might go, and then suddenly we read the mayor and 3 councillors and the chief executive, it's fine, have attended the local government New Zealand conference. But I guess my question is, where is our training? Where is our policy around training, around budget? Where's the policy around local government New Zealand AGM and conference, around the decisions that council should make around its representatives and its voting rights, and around remits, either the opportunity for us to look at remits or considering remits of other councils, so that we go with a very clear position on those remits, and have that, and know who is voting on our behalf.
Yep.
Where is all that? Because I do, yeah.
Okay, so you'll recall when we met in February, I raised, sorry, not in February. When was the last time we met at the Whanganui Club over the road? It was about May, wasn't it? June. It was June that I raised this exactly at that. Were you at that meeting, Philippa? I can't remember. You might have been away. Were you there? How many times have you met with the rest of the council at the Whanganui Club?
Oh, once or twice. No, twice.
Once, twice. So you were there.
They're not formal meetings.
I understand that, but it was to tease out. All right. So tease out a CPD strategy for all councillors. The idea being that in any 1 year, a councillor should be able to attend a significant conference or workshop, and then maybe 2 small ones, either web-based or ones that were being held here in which there's no travel or accommodation requirement. And I thought that had a lot of merit. And I haven't had any feedback. The only person who's ever raised this before today, or sorry, last week when you first raised this, Councillor Baker-Hogan, by email, was Councillor Duncan. He's the only person who has discussed continuing professional development or continuing education. And Councillor Duncan and I both talked with Malcolm Hunt, and sadly Malcolm's been absent from the building for a while, about developing a clear protocol around that. I'm happy to continue developing that with mindful of Malcolm's absence. If council is of a mind for me to sequester funds, have them in the budget. This is something I've mentioned for several times this year. Are you happy for me to continue to do that? Councillor Beckhogan, yep.
So this item is about the report from Local Government New Zealand Conference.
Yeah, you've just
it's nothing to, I mean, elected member training budget should be public information. It should come to a it should come. I mean, I'm clear. I think that's just something. If you look at a whole lot of councils, you'll find it comes either early in the training or it comes during the annual plan process. So, I think that should just be a given. But as far as the Local Government New Zealand Conference, there's rules around it. We got no opportunity to consider remits, to look at new remits ourselves.
So you had, sorry, Councillor Beckhogan, you had no opportunity within the formal meeting context to do that. I accept that. Of course, you would have been absent at the July meeting, because you were absent in the July meeting in which we would have discussed this. I've already apologised and given a mea culpa the day I sent the remits out for your position, and you provided me your consideration of it. I agree that wasn't optimum. It won't happen again next year. Again, part of a lot of the fault rests with me. Some of the fault is because staffing issues, as I've previously outlined. They'll be resolved for next year.
So, okay, thank you for this conversation. It's a bit of a conversation. I don't know if this is, but what I haven't written resolutions because, but I think I put them in a last email. I'm going to be, we can't rely on it won't happen again. That's no disrespect to you.
Of course you can.
The Mayor.
Absolutely.
We need to have a process in place because I don't accept every council, with all due respect, if yourself and the chief executive get run over by a bus tomorrow morning, be very unfortunate and it's not going to happen. But council processes need to go regardless.
Yeah, so you're after policy. I've just outlined policy for continuing professional development, which would include attendance at conferences, right? Would have to include that because of the expenses, and you dismissed that. It is a policy that I'm really happy to continue to work on. No. Are you happy for me to work on that?
No, I would like to, as I put previous, that comes through strategy and finance. One, the clear process, we already have it, but again, it needs to come because it hasn't been followed. Through strategy and finance, the clear process for Local Government New Zealand conferences, the budget, attendance, that it all goes publicly through council, and separately, a CPD budget, whatever, for elected members. So
you'd see them as two separate things. Okay, yes, it'll go to strategy and finance. I'm really happy. I'm really happy to if Kate's happy to take that on, to have that go to strategy and finance. Really happy for that, and in two separate forms. But I do see it as kind of yeah, for sure.
Could I have my last question? Last question was, because you promised it, I'd like to know the full cost of the Local Government New Zealand Conference. I know you were promised, and I'll have to revert to officers. We'll find that out after I've heard Councillor Joblin. I still have other issues to address around remits with you, Councillor Baker-Hogan.
I just agree in that it would be entirely appropriate for the conference to come under the ambit of CPD, because I mean it's not like we're going away having a nice time. We go away and we go to all the workshops and we do a lot of learning, so it's certainly part of our continuing professional development.
That's what I would have thought.
Thank you.
So as for remits, yes, we do need a process again somewhat that was hindered, and my naivety, I'll tell you that. I didn't even think of it until the weekend before the conference was due to begin. But thank you very much for the 4 or 5 of you who responded But of course, it's also difficult to maintain a position that's been voted on, perhaps, or discussed when remits are altered by amendment, when you hear debate, when certain things go on. For example, voting for the president of the local government conference was something that occurred at the AGM of Local Government New Zealand. And I can say that our position could have changed depending on the ability and heft with which the speakers addressed us. So a firm position of council can't be a firm position, and we just have to kind of delegate authority to that, if you understand. For example, in November, I do believe, Councillor Baker Hogan went to Stratford to the Zone 3 meeting to vote on the Zone 3 representative. Now, we didn't give her any clear directions, and Councillor Baker Hogan made her own decision on which of the two candidates from neighbouring districts we supported. So you did. Sorry. In fact, thankfully I've kept all those emails, Councillor Baker Hogan, and you said he sounds like the man we should support. That was beyond any discussion from me indicating my support. Again, we gave you delegated authority, so it's entirely appropriate. Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Look, I don't want to go on in this area, and mine is more a comment because I don't think there's much in the way of questions, but I do think we need to address a system for better looking at the whole remit thing. I have to say I was bitterly disappointed at the remits brought to LGNZ's table by the New Zealand local
report. We certainly didn't go in the stretch Hummer that I was wanting, but
we stayed at a low-cost hotel, not Sky City, which meant we had to walk.
Yeah, so a lot of the TA stayed in Sky City. So
not us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Process and action accordingly, that a paper or elected member training come to the Student Finance Committee for further consideration.
I like that one. The council note, LGNZ AGM. A process.
And remit, AGM and remit process.
Okay, yep.
Isn't it, Graham?
All right.
Crown Plaza Hotel in Auckland.
So I'm going to put in motion myself, and that is that the policy implications noted within the paper, so that's around cats and sugar, the sugar sweetened beverages policy, are referred to the Strategy and Finance Committee, so that the policy implications in the paper about the LGNZ conference remits are referred to the Strategy and Finance Committee. Doesn't stand alone. Yeah. So we have to take within the paper the policy implications from the LGNZ conference remits. Yeah, indeed.
I've seen in here that there's also GST and driver license program. Is that not being included purely because it's a central government issue?
Yeah. So anything anything we've been tasked to do, I've referred to the Strategy and Finance, and I believe the CATS one is. Okay. Indeed, Councillor Joblin.
That's just in relation to the GST, which I don't remember whether we supported this or not, but I know I didn't, because I think what it lacked was that it wasn't part of an overall strategy,
Yes.
and it probably, well, in my speak, it was a fairly crude tool to get some money back into local governments to fund infrastructure.
Indeed.
And instead it should have been part of a wider strategy about how we're actually going to pay,
Yes.
and what funding looks like in the future. Is it beyond the resources of this council to try and add to that conversation?
No, not at all. But I just want to bear in mind that 2 years ago, my remit that was supported Zone 3 around central government, funding for territorial authorities went to local government conference and was passed almost unanimously. I think it was one dissenter, and has gone nowhere. So it is a continuing discussion
issue.
about how
Yeah.
local government is funded. All right, so it's that's moved me. It's seconded Councillor Joblin. All those in favour? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Alan, Councillor Taylor.
Well, Philippa's before me.
Oh, Philippa.
No, that's all right at the moment.
Just
That'll be next.
It's rather than a point of debate, it's more a question as to whether, when, and your ruling on this, your worship, be useful, whether we are bound as a council to even consider a remit that just asks government to move in a particular direction. That is the remit around cats. Clearly we voted around the sugar one, so we have an obligation to bring that issue back to this council. We didn't support the cat remit, and it was just a request that government continue its cat management strategy and finish it. Do we have to debate that? Do we have to bring that to this council at all?
Possibly not. And just reading that, it really is only the sugar sweetened beverage policy that's up for debate here. You did right. Thank you, Councillor Taylor, for your guidance. Councillor Craig.
Yes, can I please ask approximately how much time and money will be spent on the strategy team looking at the sugar issue to bring a paper to council?
It'd be staff time. I'm not sure.
Is it significant, not significant? Can you easily do it? Or is this something that we should be getting an indication of whether or not we generally support it or not at this point? I'm just wanting to get a feel.
Yes, Councillor Joblin.
BHB a number of years ago adopted a sugar-free beverage policy on site.
Yep.
And so they had quite a lot of good information already gathered. So I would suggest that it's a very limited piece of work from our perspective if we can piggyback on what they've done.
The other side is that will it disadvantage the use of some of our venues, such as Coca-Cola at Cook's Gardens for rugby or something like that? So,
may I?
I think we're getting to debate rapidly. So I think this is a discussion for the Strategy and Policy Committee rather than here.
Absolutely.
So we're only asked to consider it, so we must consider it. We can consider it and dismiss it, and consider it and ask for more information.
Look at a boxing match.
But it has to be considered. I don't want to go there. So, all those in favour, with no further discussion, all those in favour? Against?
Me.
Councillor Craig.
And I want that noted, please.
Councillor Craig loves sugar. Can you write that down?
No.
It's passed. Councillor Craig was very, how should I say, vocal about her opposition to this at the local government conference. So we have two more resolutions. I'm going to accept both because I think they are relevant. That Council notes the Local Government New Zealand AGM and remit process and action accordingly. I'd say rather than AGM annual conference. Would you accept that? You say AGM.
Well, it actually is. It is the local government AGM process.
Okay, I'm happy to do that and action it accordingly. And secondly, that a paper on elected member training come to the Strategy and Finance Committee for further consideration. I'll accept both. Is there a mover? Councillor Baker Hogan's moved both. Is there a seconder for both? Councillor Vinson? Okay. Yes, you feel free to speak to that, Councillor Baker Hogan.
Just to speak briefly to it, there is a very clear process. So the first resolution around the remit process and action it is for our management to look at and make sure it is action. There'll need to be a timeline where we need to look at and consider remits, where we need to consider remits from other councils, where we may need to get those to Zone 3 meetings, whatever, and get us into the process where we support other councils or don't. But it's a very clear process, so this is not extra work. This is sitting there. This is actually part of our core business. As being a member of Local Government New Zealand, or otherwise we might as well not, which is what we were for a number of years, in my opinion. And the second one really is, around transparency around our process around training. That's really important. Really, we probably should have considered this going into the annual plan. It should be budgeted. Possibly it is, but I haven't. But we need to be very transparent with our community about what is our total budget. I can tell you, Palmerston North City Council is about $70,000. Their total budget for elected member training, and every conference they go to just comes forward a brief paper saying this is why we're recommending you go to. This is what this is about. There's people put in their expression of interest or not, and it's noted. So I would appreciate the support of council.
Just to confirm that our budget is $30,000. So, any further speakers? Okay, Councillor Joplin.
Thank you. Happy to support the first recommendation. The second recommendation, I'm not going to support it because it presupposes this is a new idea. This is not a new idea. The elected member training process and budget has already been talked about, as the Mayor has outlined. It was already in train, so it seems to me a bit unnecessary to actually put a recommendation up there like that it's a new idea when actually it was already in train. I'm not sure that strategy and finances, I'm happy enough to take it on if that's what council decides, but there was already a process in place for that to happen. It had just been delayed for the reasons as outlined by the Mayor.
Yeah, speaking to it, I don't think it's a thing for the Strategy and Finance Committee either. I think it is something for the full council, and as several emails have indicated in the past week, it should be led by the Mayor. It should be led by the Mayor. Those emails by the mover of the motion. So I'm going to support number one. I think it's totally appropriate, but I won't be supporting number two. Can you? What's the... Oh, no, you can't move an amendment because you seconded the motion. No. Councillor Baker Hogan? That means the whole thing lapses.
I'm not precious about where it comes to, but speaking...
I will accept that motion. I don't think it changes any debate that's been indicated to this point. Okay. You're right to reply.
Well, my brief right of reply is we do need it because it may be in motion, but it hasn't come forward, and that's why we've had the situation around the Local Government New Zealand Conference where it was indicated 2 elected members were going, or 2 councillors, but 3 went. We don't know the budget, we haven't approved it, and we still don't know the cost of that. So, you know, we need to get this on the table for discussion and for transparency ASAP, and it could have had plenty of time to get here prior to the Local Government New Zealand Conference.
Yes, I'm happy to.
There's no point in order.
It's in terms of what Councillor Baker Hogan is misrepresenting the facts. The facts are there is a budget for the training, and every time council spends a small piece of a budget, it does not necessarily come to council for sign off. You know,
I actually should. I tend to agree, but but I won't accept the point of order because Councillor Baker Hogan has finished speaking and was making a more general point, I believe. Even though her implication that there's no budget is an error. I think Councillor Baker Hogan is seeking that there is transparency about when clear rules about who's going to local government conferences are variegated, as happened this year. So I'll put the motions separately. I've approved that change to council. I should actually move that. I'll move the amendment. Sorry, the process is muddy. I wish you hadn't said that right.
It's not an amendment because the seconder...
Oh, no, it's not. That's right. That's right. It's not an amendment. So we don't have to put that. We'll just put the motion that a council note the LGNZ AGM arraignment process and action appropriately. All those in favour? Against carried. That a paper on elected member training come to council for further consideration. All those in favour? Thank you. Well done. Number 6, Remuneration Authority Determinations, July 2017, at page 50. Oh, Councillor Craig put the motions. Can someone, well, she's moved them. I just want to see if there's anything that Charlotte wants to address us with, regale us with. Push your button. How about the right-hand side?
Ah, right. Worked it out. I suppose if you want to move through this quickly, the only thing we really need to clarify is the district plan hearings payments. You'll recall in June it was resolved that we would pay $100 for the chair and $80 for the other members, and that was kept at 4 hours. The implications of this 2017 determination is that the cap no longer exists, so it would be $100 and $80 for the whole duration. So the question is whether the council wants to revisit those amounts. I suppose that's one of the key implications of this new determination.
Councillor Baker Hogan.
Sorry, so just for clarity, the determinations we made are in place. There is a, if we were to, if we move the resolutions in front of us, are we accepting the new determination which gets rid of the cap, which could mean in an 8-hour meeting, a chair of a meeting could get $800?
Yes.
So if we approve these resolutions as they are, so we'd have to, where would we have to, what would we have to change here to stick with the cap, our cap?
So, yeah, we would have to resolve, or pass another resolution to stick with the maximum 4-hour cap, because the process is now that would not go through the Remuneration Authority as it did in the past. So it would be a separate process outside that Remuneration Authority process to set, as we did with non-elected members on hearings. Council can pass a resolution to that effect. So,
we'd have to pass.
You would have to pass another resolution that doesn't stay with the 2017 determination.
Thank you.
Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Vincent.
Why is, can you just explain to me why Councillor Allen's...
Alan is the chair of the Resource Management or District Plan arm of the Statutory Management Committee, and as such he could benefit from financially above and beyond anyone else here.
Can you just explain to me, Charlotte, the expected frequency of district plan meetings, let's say in the next 12 months?
I'd have to find that out for you. I haven't got that at the top of mind really for this report. I think we have reported on that in the past, but I'd have to refresh my memory.
I mean, will there be any?
Yes, there will. Resource consent hearings are treated separately. District plan hearings, district plan hearings were taken differently in the past. Under this determination, they will be treated exactly the same as resource consent hearings.
So, well, just to get an idea, in the last 12 months, how many days would have qualified?
Do you know, as the chair of that committee, how many hearings you've sat on? I'm not sure.
Yes, you are. You're allowed to contribute with it. But of course, Alan may not have been chair for all of last year.
Unless you did,
Worship. I can't remember if the Papakainga one was...
In the last 12 months, I think I've chaired 3 hearings, most of which were no more than half a day. Or a little bit more, maybe.
I think
up
the
to
next
6
one's
hours.
scheduled for
But,
December.
sorry?
I think the next one's scheduled for December.
The next one is December, and there'll be a large one probably near the end of next year, or maybe not quite even then, might be after that. So there are not a lot.
But when they're large, they can be very large. There was the Built Heritage one in 2012 was 3.5 days just dealing with that, with another couple of days dealing with hillside instability, which you'll remember.
Yeah, I do remember that. I don't remember getting any fees, but...
No. You would have got small fees because it was $50.
I think it was $100 a day.
$100 a day, was it? But it was exhausted halfway through that the period of 7 days, which we did there. We'd run out of money about after 3 or 4 days, so we did the last 3 days gratis. So your service is appreciated, Rob. Yes.
We need to find some sensible way through this.
Yes, indeed.
I hear what Councillor Phillip is saying about getting, $800 for a 8-hour meeting or whatever, and I think that's probably a bit excessive.
Yep.
But then $100 for a 3-day meeting is ridiculous. So maybe the cap is a good idea. So my question there would be, through you, Mr. Mayor, how much administration do you have to go through to get the deviation from what the policy is? How much work will it take for you to solve that for us if we pass the recommendation to stay with the cap?
You just stay with the cap. That's easy for us to administer. That's what we were going to do until this determination came out. So it's just reverting back to what you've already resolved to do.
Okay. So I'm happy to support that.
Yes.
I would really like a bit of a proviso there in terms of fairness, that if something like your 3-day or your week-long hearing does occur, that there can be application made to revert to the policy or have special consideration given to the hearing fees for that. Is that possible?
I'm in your hands, Charlotte. I mean, we need a clear direction on what we're doing in this paper, because otherwise I mean, we could put it off for September and ask you to come back with when what the anticipated resource consent, district plan hearings are, or we could pass a motion now. I'm in your hands.
Yeah, I think back in June you were happy to have the cap. I don't see what's changed really in terms of, just the last 2 months. The only thing that has changed is this determination that's come out. I don't think your views have really changed at all. So
just to follow on to that,
keep the cap, and then if it does happen that there is an excessively long hearing, we could always bring that back to the council if that was to occur.
Yep. Councillor Baker-Hogan. I just want to
wonder if we're getting confused here. There was a cap of $100 a day for members or the chair, and less for there was that pre-June. It was $100 a day, and it was $80 for a member.
Yes.
We made a determination. We lifted that to $100 an hour for the chair, $80 an hour for a member, up to 4 hours. That is where we sit now. So that is where I stand personally. We've made a recent decision, and due to affordability, our rates, our debt, and fairness, that seems reasonable, no matter if it's a 3 or 4 day hearing, because it's still, I think it's very reasonable. If we were to go with these resolutions, we're getting rid of that cap, which means if a hearing did go for 8 hours in a day and went for 4 days, then you can do your own maths on that one.
This still question time, isn't it?
Sorry, Councillor Craig, what was that?
Still question time we're in, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, but it was clarity on.
We're talking about the old cap, not the current cap.
Yeah, it's the current cap we're talking about. Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Can I ask the officer, through the chair, why the council was recommending to follow the LGN's remuneration authority when we have already had a paper come and there's always been discussed and we've already agreed to a cap? Why didn't council recommend that we retain the cap in this paper?
Because this determination applies to all councils, not just us.
So you're recommending, so your officers are recommending that we drop the cap?
No, this is what the Remuneration Authority has determined for all councils, so it affects us.
Okay, but you are recommending, because it says at the top of this page, recommendation to council, which I'm taking, when I read that, I'm thinking that that officers have considered this item and you are recommending to us what's sitting here in the recommendation, which is effectively dropping the cap. So I'm trying to understand that.
That's not the only thing. This 2017 determination enables us to pay you those amounts on page 51, your remuneration. It enables us to reimburse travel expenses, communication costs. So this determination contains a whole lot more than just the district plan hearings. So we need to adopt the determination so that we can do it. But if there's any exception to that determination,
we need to pass a resolution.
Then we need to pass a resolution to keep the cap.
So I guess it's the frustration is probably my fault in the chair's briefing that I didn't demand a written resolution to that effect, because we're having to go on the fly. That probably lies for the most part with me. We have a resolution now which says the council reconfirms the cap for the district plans hearings as decided on the 7th of June 2017.
I'll second that.
It's moved by Councillor Joblin, seconded by Councillor Craig.
Reconfirms the cap as decided on 7th June.
That's 6.4, because I agree with Charlotte, the other three have to be discussed. Right. I think that would resolves matters?
Now you had a rewrite the other motions, but no second. The first three.
Who moved them?
Councillor Helen.
Councillor Craig has moved the other three. I will second the 6.1 to 6.3. Indeed, Councillor Vincent. Microphone, Rob.
The resolution of the 7th of June would appear to have back pay involved, effective from 9th of October 2016.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, but as we've heard from Alan, that it hasn't been substantial back pay.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was from the election, and what we're also seeking from the Remuneration Authority is that the elected members' remuneration be backdated to then as well, not the 4th of April as they've currently taken it from.
Okay.
We're still waiting to hear back on that.
I don't think they pay you enough, so you may as well keep trying to get back pay from back when you're elected. So, okay, I'll put those motions. Any debate? In lieu of debate, I'll put those motions. All those in favour? Okay. So 6.1 to 3. All those in favour? 6.4. All those in favour? Against? Okay, Councillor Bacon voted against it last time. Carried. And thank you very much, Charlotte. Moving on to 7 actions arising from previous minutes. You'll notice that it looks like a list of Don Bradman's career averages with those hundreds. Ooh. Okay, it's moved by Councillor Craig, seconded by Councillor Chandler Mackay. Any discussion? No. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Now the minutes of committees for adoption and receipt. First is the Property and Community Services meeting of the 20th of June. Councillor Craig, do you want to advert to anything within that agenda?
No, I don't think there's any need to say anything else.
Okay.
It was 2 meetings ago, actually, so.
Yeah, you've had one since, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so moved by Councillor Craig, seconded by Councillor Chandler Mackay. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Secondly, the Strategy and Finance Committee meeting of 6th of July. Councillor Joblin.
Mr. Mayor, I wasn't actually there because I was homesick, but I hear it was a good meeting. Possibly,
I was the
because
chair.
it was without me.
Jenny chaired it, and she's not here.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. So, any questions, comments? It's moved by. I'll move it. Can I have a second? Seconded by. It's lapsing. Seconded by Councillor Craig. In lieu of debate, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. And lastly, we've got the minutes of the Strategy Management Committee held on the 11th of July, where we heard submissions for the dangerous and sanitary buildings policy, the Whanganui smoke-free outdoor areas policy, and the active transport strategy. Councillor Craig.
I've got a question. In my board papers, where all these minutes are, I cannot find a copy of those strategies that we approved, nor policy, and I couldn't find it in the Karen's admitting fault.
Karen is admitting fault.
So, okay, and I actually asked an officer for a copy, and when he sent it, I couldn't open that either. So I am a bit disappointed because there was some facts I wanted to check out on one of them, and I realised that because if they haven't been included in the paper, does that cause an issue for this council to adopt them?
They're already adopted, those policies.
They're already adopted, but
we only receive them because the Statutory Management Committee have delegated authority at that point because we hear all the submissions. You can vote against them today, but what that means is that the Statutory Management Committee would just do it all again. But that's Karen's mea culpa. I appreciate that.
So, but the wording at the end of this recommendation is the word adopted.
We're adopting the minutes.
Okay.
Not the policy.
Okay.
But I don't see that necessarily as an issue. But it is disappointing, and that won't. I have assurance from Karen Turner that won't happen again. So I'm just flicking through. I was looking for something and I cannot find it. Sorry, Councillor Baker Hogan.
What? I was also absent from that Statutory Management Committee, but I did find the minutes, and that is in the Statutory Management Committee papers and board papers. So, yeah.
Yes. The policy adopted is not there.
But the draft policy is there.
But the minutes will be at the back of the minutes, I would assume.
But obviously I want to speak to the motion when that's...
Indeed, okay. So
what is the resolution, please?
The resolution is that it's there on page 59. It's also up on the screen. So it's moved by me, seconded by Councillor Anderson. I'm happy to...
I'd like to speak to
it. Yes, well, as I moved, I will speak first to it. These are three significant policies. I particularly want to advert to the smoke-free and vape-free outdoor areas policy, which we had some very compelling submissions about. We've had some feedback. Some of it's been negative. I had to weather an interview with BFM, the Auckland Student Radio, about it, and we had a pretty robust debate about it. In the end, while I was speaking to BFM, two people walked down Guyton Street, smoking tobacco. I could see them smoking tobacco. That's fine. It's an educated policy. It's not a punitive policy. And I think that the key thing about this policy is not bylaw. It's not, you're not going to be slapped with a vaping ticket. And we certainly, what we're not doing with vaping in particular is ignoring the fact that it assists smoking cessation. But we had clear evidence from medical professionals that it affects, vaping affects, sure it might be 1 in 20 as bad as smoking, but it affects people nonetheless with oral cancers and other health disabilities. So yeah, we're taking a bit of a lead on it, but we're not ignoring the fact that it might assist cessation. And you see vapors the whole time. I think they look stupid, but that's them. And what we don't want is for this to be normalised. The fact you're taking hot stuff into your mouth and expelling the vapour to be normalised, so that the very next step is cigarettes. And I want to really acknowledge Lauren Tamhana, who sat here and vaped and could hardly speak for 20 minutes. But Lauren went down, purchased some vape liquid. I think it was strawberry or cherry, some bizarre flavours, some flavours that seem to be targeted at younger people. And yes, she was offered nicotine liquid, free. And to my mind, nothing was more cynical than that. Nothing suggests that for some retailers, that's looking at vaping as a gateway. And indeed, I spoke to a council staff member directly after we'd made our deliberations, and she said, that was my son. Started vaping, was a vape boy, and now he's smoking a pack a day. Now, there's very little scientific evidence about that. It's only anecdotal. But equally, a lot of the pushback we're getting was anecdotal. So we have to rely on the evidence that was presented to us. It was clear it was from medical professionals and people who have this as their job. So I'm proud to endorse what is an educative, not a punitive, policy for our CBD. Oh, Councillor Baker-Hogan.
Thank you. Well, I've sent you just a link on an opinion today, but I've also followed this topic. Not at the, well, I was away for 2 weeks and I couldn't be at the deliberations, but I've read all the social media and the news too, and been interested in this area of vaping for some time. But I think it's the dumbest decision this council's made. This is not about vaping. This is about reducing smoking. 5,000 people die of it. Yes, it's not. We're not the lead agency, absolutely. But if we have an interest in this and we have a policy, then we need to be effective. 5,000 people die of smoking each year in New Zealand. 9,000 babies' health may be affected because their mums do smoke. 40 to 60% of the women pregnant in our region smoke. And this is about reducing smoking. There's only 3 things that can reduce smoking. Ban it. But no government will be brave enough to do that. Have incentives, and some district council health boards, I believe, have done that, where, for example, their pregnant mothers are offered financial rewards and put on a program, and to over a period of time to cut smoking, and there seems to be some evidence that that's been quite successful. Or get people on e-cigarettes and vapor. I hate the look of that stuff. But it is not. But all the research is showing that it is reducing smoking by up to 95%. So but our smoking in this New Zealand it's just a wild dream that we're ever going to get to 2025 smoke-free target. In our community, we are tracking up, not down. We've had no effect. There's been no effect from government of anything so far, apart from vapour, and you know, I mean, it's got to the stage, of course, as we know, that the government, you know, I'm not necessarily saying the government's got it right, particularly that colour of government, but the government is, sorry, what are they calling it? They're putting in place the apologies for a moment. Just lost it. Legalising. I mean, they're legalising the import of vapouring products for sale with nicotine by the end of 2018. And in fact, the Associate Health Minister encouraged every smoker to take it up. So, they're not wrong, because the evidence show it's having a 95% effect. So, you know, I read about being bold and brave, and I read about our leading edge strategy, but this is not leading. This is about sounding good and not doing good. This is not doing good. If we want to do good, we need to reduce smoking, and this will do nothing to reduce smoking. So I'm really, really disappointed in this in going this far. I think you've got to, yeah, this is you know, a small group of well-meaning people have got have convinced this council to do something that only sounds good. It doesn't do good.
Thank you, Councillor Baker, and I should just I'll say that for my right reply. Go, Councillor Joplin.
I don't want to relitigate the whole issue of what we went through, but I do need to rebut some of what Philippa's suggesting. You know, if you've been involved in health boards and things, you'll understand about research that there's often different studies that come out that might disagree with each other. But I'm going to read to you from John McMiniman's letter to the editor about vaping. What Philippa suggests around the 95% being able to switch to vaping, I'm interpreting as being able to switch to vaping as 95% successful, is simply not right. I mean, what John McMiniman's saying is that what is true for vaping is also likely to be true for passive vaping. Second-hand exposure is much less harmful than to smoking, yet it is unwise to say that it is harmless. All people have the right to smoke, to breathe smoke-free air, and there would be concern about exposure to pregnant women, children and people who have asthma and other respiratory conditions. Contrary to some evidence, there are reports of vaping as an entry point to smoking, and that's what Charlie talks about. Linking smoke and vape-free spaces to a smoke-free policy is not to brand vaping as evil, but to acknowledge that vaping is not health risk-free, and its role in helping to achieve smoking reduction is not negated by this policy. Rather, a smoke and vape-free space policy supports the work of health services by encouraging the best option for good health.
Thank you, Councillor Joblin. Councillor Anderson.
I'm sure they're all good people trying to get everyone to stop smoking, Philippa, and I take on board what you say. This report, which I can't find now, which is in the Herald, I'm sure they're good people. Who's it? Maria Glover and David Swinell. Pretty much guarantee they'd never smoked. Vaping looks twice as bad to me as smoking. It's horrendous. Talk about putting a flag up. It can be laced with nicotine and they're offering it free. There's only one way to stop smoking, and that's to stop smoking. And vaping won't do
it. So with that, I'll put the I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Public excluded items. Motion to exclude the public, that the public be excluded from the following parts. And that Annette Main, incoming chair, and Matthew Doyle, outgoing chair of Whanganui District Council Holdings, remain in the meeting after the public has been excluded to present the item 8, the Holdings report. Can I have a mover? I'll move it. Can I have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Taylor. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So, slight adjournment while the cameras are removed.